BLM movement seen as more and more unfavorable in the eyes of Americans. This lack of conversation and discourse even surrounding this matter doesn't help their cause, nor does intimidating, harassing, and in many instances physically attacking journalists who are trying to tell the story of these protesters, indiscriminately burning down and destroying businesses and enterprises of private individuals, or just randomly targeting them and terrorizing them because they just have a different skin color than you, or they're having dinner, is not a recipe for success. I'm sorry, but a movement based on physical violence, intimidation, harassment, and abuse is not a movement that I wish to be a part of. And time again, we are seeing this being excused. Not just ignored, but excused many times by many politicians, establishment media figures, and corporations who put their stamp of approval on everything, ignoring the big elephant in the room that is pushing us closer and closer to fight each other. Again, many insane incidences, especially with drivers, that happened last night. One incident particularly, a Prius driver. I mean, these people are their own kind of culture of individuals. I mean, Prius drivers are, and I can say a lot about Prius drivers, but I won't. But an incident unfolded yesterday in Los Angeles where a Prius driver literally tried to go through a protest. He was chased down. He was assaulted. His car was attacked a number of times, and then he ended up getting arrested, or later, as we found out, detained by the police officers after getting attacked by a mob of angry individuals that literally attacked him. And very strangely, he's the one that ended up in handcuffs that night. Now again, police accountability is a major issue, but it's absolutely not being addressed here. When it comes especially to many numerous cases, especially with the case of Philip Bradford, it's something that definitely deserves to have a discussion, but there isn't one about this particular incident, which should have everyone discussing and talking about it rationally. We're also living in a time where a lot of police officers oddly ignore one group of people for their political ideas, ignore one group of violent elements and crime, meanwhile using a more heavy-handed approach on others for ridiculous infractions that are made up by politicians, not even backed by science, where police officers literally arrest people for choosing not to wear a mask. Recently in Ohio, a mother who was sitting alone by herself at a middle school football game watching her kid play sports was literally dragged out and tasered and arrested for not wearing a mask. And of course, innocent mothers sitting by themselves are not the only hardcore criminals being punished by the state. It's also a lot of children who, of course, are forced to go through insane regulations and made-up rules. As now in Colorado, 18 to 22-year-olds are even banned from attending any form of gathering. They're told to isolate from each other. Meanwhile, there's BLM protests all the time, uncontested in that state. And these insane, illogical, draconian measures are even used against students who are doing their courses online. Yes, students who are literally going through their courses, their education, whatever the slaves think it is. Online students are literally being suspended from their schools, and colleges are keeping their tuition money because they decided to attend a gathering. And as pothead politicians like New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio continue to punish anyone trying to make any kind of livelihood in New York City, even with the numbers and cases going down, he still just said that outdoor dining will now become permanent, and him, along with New York City, quote, health officials are threatening to shut down more businesses as if their tyranny wasn't enough, following protocols and guidelines from, of course, national organizations that can't even get their official story right. They have changed it often, they have manipulated it, and they can't seem to get anything right. And you trust these individuals to run an election? What? That, of course, is also in question as a large number of mail-in ballots are being found just being absolutely thrown away. As in Wisconsin, authorities are now investigating absentee ballots that were found in a ditch. In Pennsylvania, military ballots cast for Donald Trump were found in a dumpster. And as the country keeps fighting each other over the smallest little political difference, as the mainstream media and other establishment figures are cheering it on, we're headed towards a very dangerous situation where, of course, Donald Trump and Joe Biden face off in an election where already voices like Hillary Clinton are telling Biden not to concede, and Donald Trump is insinuating that he might not concede either. All of this as ballots are being thrown out. A private monopoly company connected to intelligence agencies, Facebook, along with the lying mainstream media, will only make this situation that much worse. Now, I don't know about you, but things don't look very peachy from here. So yeah, that's my forecast. I expect a crap storm incoming. Prepare accordingly. And if you thought I was wrong about anything, let me know what in the comment section below. I always appreciate it. Constructive criticism. I usually answer comments within the first hour that a video is out. So subscribe, click the notification button, and maybe if you win the YouTube lottery, you'll maybe see our video. If you thought this video was helpful, I'm covering all the crap in our society. Share it with your friends and family members. It's more important than ever. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't.
I mean, we've seen every bit of totalitarianism unleashed, including censorship of you and of many.
Hey everybody, Josh Huerter, World Alternative Media here, and we are joined by the one and only Jeffrey Tucker once again of the American Institute for Economic Research, as well as a contributor to Forbes magazine, and the author of the new book, Liberty or Lockdown, which I'm really excited to go into today because it's a very timely book. As you can imagine, we have been watching this lockdown scenario play out now for the better part of the last 8 months, and it's doesn't show any signs of ending anytime soon. In fact, there's a lot of signs that it's going to get worse. And Jeffrey, I wanted to ask you first to give our viewers the premise of your new book and why you wrote it.
I wrote it because somebody has to speak out, and I've been writing on this topic now since January, essentially. And now we have plenty of evidence that liberty works and that lockdowns do not, and that the virus is not responding in any sense to government power. In fact, everything the governments have done, it's the argument of the book, has been to crush people's liberties, rights, and prosperity. And none of it has had any effect on the virus whatsoever. And the most successful virus mitigation strategies everywhere in the world were the places that remain free, like South Dakota and Sweden, and a few other places, not that many. And that is the right path. So, you know, I'm speaking to you as, you know, a longtime libertarian, and a lot of times people get very confused. Liberty is only for good times, non-emergency times, but actually, liberty is good for all times, and especially under conditions of disease mitigation. I wrote this just January 27th, warning against everything that was coming, and people said I was crazy, that we have a Bill of Rights, we have a Constitution. That would never happen here, but in fact it did happen, and it happened for very specific reasons. And so the book is about those reasons, and about what a huge mistake it has been, and how the public has been lied to at every step. And what I think is going to happen is a huge reaction against lockdown ideology and a re-embrace of liberty after all this is over.
And I mean, in a time of emergency, it seems like that is liberty's time to shine. It's a time to prove the ideas that so many of us have put forward for so many years, especially yourself. And I mean, going forward, let's just play devil's advocate for a second here. All these arguments for the lockdown, oh, you're going to kill grandma, you're going to cause all these problems. I mean, what do you say to the average person who's getting this information from the television news and really, really, truly believes it and thinks that you're a horrible, selfish person for daring to say freedom is a good thing in this time of chaos?
Well, that's what Dan Andrews is telling everybody in Australia, that anybody who's against lockdowns is selfish. I don't even know what to say about that, because the best mitigation strategies are all based on what society can do in consultation with doctors And managers of long-term living facilities and people in their own risk assessment of their own lives, and the thing that we learned over the course of the 20th century is that you have the best chance of dealing with the disease so long as you have normal social function. But anytime you start locking people down or using quarantines or travel restrictions or business closures, school closures, limits on public events and that sort of thing, you end up causing massive psychological trauma that can result in drug abuse, alcoholism, suicide, and a loss of income. And the people who suffer the most from this are the poor, the middle class, and the people about whom apparently nobody really cares that much. And it ends up being just the elites who win under a lockdown scenario, precisely as we've seen here. So I see this as being, like, it's a little bit shocking to me that we have not had more people against the lockdown since the very beginning. I mean, the forces are growing now, but where was the ACLU? Where was the left that always claims to care about the poor? Where were the old-fashioned liberals who believed in freedom of association and so on? I mean, we've seen every bit of totalitarianism unleashed, including censorship of you and of many. All in the name of pressing some one ideology on everybody. It's been absolutely Stalin-esque, and it's been brutal and terrible. And I congratulate anybody who survived this through this whole period of the last 8 months with their hope and good spirits intact, because it's been a tough time.
Yeah, the government's definitely the biggest virus I see on the planet. And, it's been a very stressful time for those of us that believe in individual freedom. Dealing with this year has been more than just a boot on our throat. I mean, right now, as I speak to you, I'm forced into quarantine in Canada. And, I just want to travel from one place to another, but the government says they know better than me and what's best for me and what's best for everyone around me. So they forced me into quarantine. And I have to ask, we are looking at, back in April even, Bill Gates said that the lockdowns will likely kill more people than the virus. He said back in April, Bill Gates himself. And then he glossed over it and said, but still, we think the lockdowns are efficient and necessary. It's interesting moving forward because we are looking at stats of around 28 million Americans facing homelessness. That's 9 out of 100, almost 1 in 10 people facing homelessness once the moratoriums expire, if the government doesn't buy up all the houses and give them free houses. So I have to ask, going forward with all the problems with employment and housing, what will this look like? What do you think will happen to the economy after another year of this, which seems to be in the books?
Well, if that happens, there's going to be a huge liquidation in every big population center. We're always seeing people fleeing California, fleeing New York City, fleeing any city that's not open, just so they can have their basic liberties back. And that's going to have a devastating impact on real estate that hasn't even begun to adjust in a downward direction. It's going to be catastrophic. And for the arts, I don't know, are the arts ever going to come back? They will, but it's going to be a very slow slog. The big problem is what people believe about the future. Why would you open a business if it could just be shut down by your governor anytime? Why would you plan a trip if it could be canceled? Why would you plan any kind of a event if it can be just shut down immediately, as has been happening for the last really 7 months in the United States? It's going to take a very long time to get people's confidence back. And one thing that I don't think is ever going to people are going to be confident about again is public health authorities. And the CDC started this whole lockdown thing with something like 70-80% approval. Now it's down to less than 20%. People just don't trust anymore what CDC's saying. And governments themselves are being discredited all over the place. People don't believe that Baker, the governor of Massachusetts, knows more than anybody else about virus mitigation. So why does he get to boss everybody around? The same thing with Cuomo. I think all these politicians are going down. Maybe not immediately, but in the long term. This is going to cause a whole generation to be in shock. And by this time next year, we're going to be looking back at the pictures of everybody in masks and people hopping around like grasshoppers and the signs at the grocery store about social distancing and all this stuff. And it's all going to be completely discredited. We're going to realize we behaved like fools for the entirety of 2020. It's going to go down in history, really.
Well, and I feel like it's already been discredited, but people are still doing it, and we're going to get to that later. But I mean, just on the topic of the economy, watching all these small businesses try and open up and get hit one time, a second time, a third time, and they're running out of money. They're on their last cash reserves at this point, and most of them are looking at complete bankruptcy. So, you know, a lot of people have been saying, business owners, they're like, oh, I don't want to lose my business if I go against the mandates. And I'm thinking, well, if you don't go against the mandates, you're probably going to lose your business anyway at this point. So at this point, you kind of have to base things on principle. But I mean, going forward, do you think that there is any kind of recovery from this kind of thing in the next 10 years? I mean, this is so incredibly debilitating for almost any business owner or homeowner. It just doesn't seem like it could possibly bounce back anytime soon.
Well, it depends on where you are. There are certain states where things are more open than others. You know, South Dakota experiences a small decline in productivity, but they're completely open. You can have an event there. There's no restrictions on anybody doing anything. Everybody there is doing quite well. Supply chains have been massively disrupted. You know, that's another issue. It's like we got the lockdowns happened at the same time as we had the war in China. So you know that it's like I don't know, double blow, triple blow, quadruple blow, I don't know what you want to call it. So supply chains have been seriously disrupted. We've had the Federal Reserve embark on unprecedented levels of monetary expansion, which, you know, we haven't seen the price increases yet because the velocity of money is tanked, which is to say that everybody's just holding on to as much cash as they possibly can right now for fear of the future. But if that begins to shift, you're going to see a serious problems with inflation coming back. And then we have the government debt, you know, which is, we've gone way beyond the ratios that we spent in the world in any previous war, all wars combined, really. Just in the last 6 months, the level of amazing insanity. The economic fallout from this is going to be, I would say, very, very devastating for millions of people, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people around the world, potentially poverty around the world. But so the places that did stay open, South Dakota, Georgia, shut down for a little bit, and now it's mostly open. But even there, you've got some bad economic consequences. I would say Sweden and South Dakota, Taiwan, South Korea, these are the places that are positioned to ride this through with a nice V-shaped recovery. But anybody who stayed locked down, as you know, New York has, which is just utterly irrational. You know, the virus has been gone from the northeast of the United States now for 4.5 months. You can look at the data and see it, you know. But they're still locked down, It's like it's a level of public policy irrationality that I never hoped I would witness in my lifetime.
Well, it seems very rational for the government, because why would they possibly relent that power? They've never had so much power in recent history. So it just seems like, of course, they're going to cling on to as much power as they can. And government being an organized crime racket in the first place, I mean, they're laughing at all of this, I'm sure. At least most of the terrible psychopaths in office, especially in New York, considering what happened to people in nursing homes. But I have to ask, did you ever think that so many people would willingly take this beating and defend their slavery to such an extent? I mean, it's almost, even people that are mostly awake to what's going on in the world, most of them are still kind of just complying and doing whatever they're told.
It seems incredible. I never imagined that. So I've changed my mind on a lot of things, probably as you have over the last 6 months. One is that I didn't realize, to the extent, to go back to your previous point, to what extent the exercise of power was itself a kind of narcotic for these psychopaths that are in charge, you know? They're ignoring public opinion, they're ignoring the science, they're ignoring the outrage on the part of the business class and parents who kind of get they're ignoring it all just so they can continue to exercise power. And it just seems like it's the power itself has become an end in itself. I agree with you on that. As for the public reaction, yeah, you know, I've gone through most of my life presuming that most everybody is an instinctive libertarian, you know? And I think I've just been wrong about that. I didn't really understand. Now, I do think that what you've really got here is a kind of confusion over immunology and virology. Like people, were lied to in the early stages of this disease that 6.6 million, this is New York Times, 6.6 million Americans were going to die from COVID. And that's what they said. And it was a wild and insane prediction, but it got everybody super panicked. So people were sort of weirdly willing to give up
their liberty for a little bit of security.
Well, there was a panic that they were going to die, and and there was a problem in the early days. And this has to get into a little point about testing. The CDC and the FDA really screwed up the testing. They got kits from WHO and threw them in the trash because they were in China, so they were useless. And then by the time CCD made its own test, they sent it out. It didn't work. By the time the private sector fixed the test and made it work, CDC had withdrawn that. By now, we're talking about, middle of April. So people went through an entire month in the early days of the pandemic in the United States with a fundamental disease. They didn't know who had it, how you're going to get it, whether I had it, you had it, and people went into a kind of panic. They didn't even understand how deadly it was, which turns out not to be deadly, really, not unless you have pre-existing health immune system basically not functioning.
Yeah, if you're over 80 years old, you might get a 0.26% chance of death, which is about the same as the flu, actually.
Yeah, sure. And for anybody under 50, it's never good. So, and it's not even about age. It really is about the health of the immune system.
Of course.
You can be 100 years old and have a healthy immune system. This thing, it also came at a time, a very interesting time around the world where we had two successive gentle flu seasons in a row. So there was a lot of people who otherwise would have died last year or the year before, who didn't because of various therapeutic reasons, because the flus were mild. So this widespread but relatively mild virus comes along and wipes out people who were living. I mean, the average age of death for COVID-19 is 4 years long. So that gives you a sense of what we're dealing with here. People didn't know all this back in March and April, and so they're willing to kind of go along. The other thing I think is a little bit interesting is that most people believed that governments would never just shred the Constitution and violate their rights, issue stay-home orders, close schools, forbid you from flying to Paris, and so on, for light and transient reasons, to close their declaration. If they figured there's something really, really serious going on, the experts must know about it, so they trusted the experts. Now, over time, it's turned out the experts were completely wrong, and there's no way they're going to be able to suppress this much longer. I think people are figuring out. Now, the role of the media here, mass media has been really important, because media has, even now, leaning into this idea of that the virus is leading to mass death. And so if you watch television, that's all you do. I don't know how you wake up in the morning. You wake up in a state of terror all the time. So what I've done to maintain my sanity has been to watch the data. That's all I've done. Just the data and figure out what data is trustworthy, what isn't, and try to assess the realistic assessment of the risk of the virus based on the facts, not on facts in the legitimate studies, not on these ignorant reporters that are saying nonsense all the time. Let me be clear about something, however, on this point. We really have two lines of argument going on here. One is concerns prevalence and severity of the disease itself, which involves a lot of scientific questions. The other, is the political question on what you should do about it. Now, to me, those are related in the following sense, that the dangers of the disease had to be wildly exaggerated. As I say, the New York Times was predicting 6.6 million deaths back on February 27th in the podcast. That's what they predicted. Now, one of the reasons for those wild predictions was to get everybody in a state of fear so that they acquiesce to despotism. So that's the sense in which these two big subjects overlap. But I will tell you this, that even if the disease had turned out to be as terrifying and horrible and deadly as the New York Times claimed it was going to be, I still don't think there's any case for lockdowns, because none of the lockdowns do anything to mitigate disease. They don't do anything with therapeutics. They don't do anything to come up with vaccines. They don't do anything to create herd immunity. In fact, they forestall all those things. So even if the virus had been as bad as the New York Times predicted it would be, there's really still no case for lockdowns. under any conditions.
Yeah, and we know with those original tests, I mean, there's evidence that they're still doing this. They were testing lab water positive for coronavirus, and they were mistaken all other forms of coronavirus as the novel coronavirus. So, I mean, it's easy to manipulate numbers that way, and obviously it benefits certain people if you do manipulate those numbers. But of course, since what we first heard about the virus back in February and March, things have dramatically changed. Not that long after, they were saying asymptomatic spread is almost impossible. You can't get it off of surfaces. And obviously, it's not airborne. It's not an airborne illness that you can walk down the street and get, yet you still see people walking down the street. In one case, when I was in Las Vegas, middle of the desert, by themselves with a mask on. I mean, it's just a level of Stockholm Syndrome I've never seen before, and I want to laugh, but it's kind of scary. And, you know, this is a question that a lot of people are kind of concerned about answering. They don't really want to answer, but we know that there's a bunch of psychopaths in government that try to use situations to their benefit. Whether this was order out of chaos, they're using something that actually existed, or whether it might have been, you know, created in a lab. And that's something that I wanted to ask you about. I know there's a lot of speculation here, but there is a lot of evidence too. Fauci was working, he's the head of the National Institute for Allergies and Infectious Diseases, getting grants from the U.S. government to study coronavirus in bats, 96% prevalent with novel coronavirus, at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and the whole point of the study was how to spread it to humans. So I don't want to be like a crazy conspiracy theorist here, but that something doesn't seem right about that. Do you think there's evidence that they created in a lab? And if so, what does that tell you about the people in power?
You know, I guess my answer to that is I don't know. I mean, I think that there are some credible voices out there that think there's some truth to that. And I guess my feeling on it is whether or not that's true, the virus is going to go away through the creation of herd immunity. And if it was created in a lab, then we should be actually grateful it wasn't worse than it is, because it turns out to be relatively mild for almost everybody.
Government inefficiency.
Yeah. Now, one thing I do think, and it's interesting, I've been accused of being a conspiracy theorist myself, which is kind of funny, because I quite often point out that the plans for this full-scale social lockdown, targeted layered containment and social distancing and non-pharmaceutical interventions and school closures and all these things were all mapped out back in 2006, okay? So when I say that, so I thought that was widely accepted fact, that everybody knows that this happened in 2006 under the George Bush administration, and we called, a kind of meeting of epidemiologists and computer modelers and medical scientists and things to the White House to plan all this. And there was a big debate between legitimate medicine people, legitimate scientists, and all these pseudoscientists who were manipulating these models and were running agent-based models, imagining that they could just impose separation on everybody and make the virus go away. Now, all that happened in 2006, and the Bush administration ordered the CDC to roll a lot of the results of this nonsense into its virus mitigation plans into the event of bioterrorism. And there they stood on the shelf since 2006. You know, when I've pointed this out to people, like I've had people write me back and go, oh, so you're alleging a conspiracy. Well, I don't know what they're talking about, because I'm just reporting the facts of what happened. I mean, we know for sure that this is exactly. I talked to people who were there. They told me this. We've seen the papers. Robert and Laura Glass's original paper on social distancing came out in 2006, and there's an attack by Donald Henderson, the great smallpox eradicating epidemiologist who died in 2016. This is just the facts on the ground, that these plans for this grand social experiment that have never been tried in the history of humanity have been sitting there for 14 years. So this is not a conspiracy theory. I'm reporting the facts on the ground that we know about.
Yeah, well, I just spoke with my friend James Corbett a couple days ago here at WHAM, and it was interesting because he pointed out the anthrax spread a couple decades ago, where it was proven that came out of Fort Detrick. They admitted that they accidentally let the anthrax out of the labs. It got out, it infected a bunch of people died, and then it was just brushed under the rug, and the next news story replaced it. So, I mean, these things have happened multiple times before. It doesn't mean that it's happened this time, but one way or another, the government sure has taken advantage globally, I should add, of this situation, and I mean, it's unbelievable the things they've gotten away with.
Oh, exactly. And I have no question that on net, government and powerful people have kind of benefited from this. But, there's a number of things that don't make sense about this. One is the tremendous loss of tax revenue. Okay, so governments, local, state, and national governments all over the world have lost countless trillions of dollars in tax revenue they otherwise would have had. And so that doesn't seem to be in their interest. Another thing that's very interesting to me that I don't understand is the school closures. I've been sort of fighting against public schools my entire life, and I never imagined a time when government itself would just like wake up one day and say, close your schools for months, for endless months. And by the way, when you can send your kid back to school, they have to have a mask on. So this is wrecking the public schools. I don't see how that's in the interest of government to do that. So, I mean, I think that there's an element of what you're saying that, yes, powerful people have benefited from this, but also powerful people have done some extremely stupid things that aren't even in their self-interest either.
Yeah, you can be evil and inefficient at the same time, I feel. There's the issue of all of these people calling for forced vaccines right now. And look, regardless of what people feel about vaccines, I think the issue is really you can't force people to put medicine in their bodies, whether you call it medicine or not. And right now we're looking at the possibility of technocracy, Chinese-style type technocracy, where social credit. A lot of people are talking about this issue, where people would have social credit. They've been pushing this really hard in Australia and in Sweden before this whole COVID thing. What do you think will be the resistance to something as blatantly tyrannical as forcing people to vaccinate?
Already I saw a poll that said something like 70% of Americans will not get the vaccine. They have no intention. And it's actually very difficult to get people up, stick a needle in their arm, or something they're very suspicious of. I mean, people are actually even now distrustful towards the flu vaccine, right? Wrongly, I don't know. The fascinating thing about the vaccine issue that I've had basically whispered to me by some serious experts, and I looked it up actually this morning, and I found a paper that was published earlier this year, which confirmed what one infectious disease expert at Ivy League University told me, which is that a vaccine does not make the virus go away, right? It doesn't crush the vaccine. It doesn't build a wall in your system that blocks the vaccine. That's not that blocks the virus. It doesn't make you immune, What it does is draws on your own inherent immune systems to activate them and sort of supercharge them so that it's still your body keeping the vaccine away. So reprogramming your immune system so that you develop resistance, right, to the disease. Same as any other virus, so chickenpox or whatever it may be. And so you have to, in other words, for the vaccine, let's say you have a really well-functioning vaccine, and maybe we'll get that next month, maybe it'll be 2 years. We don't know. The problem is that, so here's the real problem. The population that's currently dying from COVID-19 is dying because they don't have functioning immune systems. If you don't have a functioning immune system, the vaccine does not work for you. You've got to have a functioning, relatively healthy immune system for a vaccine to actually operationally function on your body. So, in other words, for some portion of the number of people who have already died or might die in the future of COVID-19, this vaccine will be meaningless. We don't know. Is it half? Is it 90%? Is it 10%? We don't actually know. We do know the CDC says that 94% of the people who have died with COVID have died with COVID and some other comorbidities, on average 2.6, meaning heart disease and diabetes. So there's that problem. We don't even know if the vaccine would, in fact, even if we'd had it back in February, actually reduce the death toll. We don't know that. The other problem is that for the people for whom it's not fatal, it's mostly either asymptomatic or you shake it off. And it may in fact be much safer to get SARS SARS-CoV-2 virus than it would be to get the vaccine to the thing. So, and in fact, that's what an epidemiologist I read a paper that came out a few months ago. That's what it says. It's like, actually, in fact, the virus may be safer for the vast, for 99% of the population, 99.8% of the population than the vaccine itself. So here's the problem. And this was the first time I've ever spoken about this subject, and I haven't even written on it, mainly because I try to stay in my realm of competence. Nonetheless, medical issues are important here. What it means is that this vaccine might not actually be for that many people. There's not a whole lot of overlap between the people who are fatally susceptible to the virus and also have healthy immune systems, and the population for whom getting the vaccine might be even more dangerous than actually getting the virus. There's not that many people left, actually. So, I mean, to some extent, I think this talk of a vaccine is just a kind of a populist longing for a miracle cure, you know, that has no actual basis in science whatsoever. The only reason I'm kind of looking forward to the vaccine is I hope that it'll inspire people to feel as if we can go back to normal life, you know. But other apart from that, it may not actually do any medical good at all. We don't know.
Well, you're certainly more hopeful than I am, and I do appreciate that insight. I mean, I know every headline on CNN lately, not that I watch CNN, but, you know, I'll show up at a restaurant or something, and I'll see on television, you might need one vaccine a month going forward from this. It's just absurd. So at this point, you're more hopeful than I am. I don't even want to know what's going to happen next year, but I guess we'll see. This whole year has been extremely stressful for most people, from this to race riots and an election, and now, you know, let's talk about, you know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg and all this kind of stuff. And you know, as someone that is a voluntarist, I just try to stay out of politics, but until politics breaks down my door and then starts shouting in my face, so it's kind of hard to escape.